We are streaming live now. Thank you for your patience.
Thanks to the OPEGA staff and the IT staff for helping us to navigate our YouTube channel issues this morning. We're now broadcasting live, so welcome to the Committee on Government Oversight. My name is Nate Libby, and I serve as Senate Chair. We'll begin with introductions of committee members. We'll begin this morning with Senator Bailey.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I am Donna Bailey. I represent Senate District 31, which is Hollis, Leamington, Saco, Old Orchard Beach, and part of Buxton.
Thank you. Senator Bennett.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. My name is Rick Bennett. I have the honor of serving 13 towns in Oxford and Cumberland counties, the foothills and lakes region of Western Maine in the Maine Senate.
Thank you. Senator Timberlake.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. My name is Jeff Timberlake. I serve Senate District 22 and part of Androscoggin and parts of Kennebec County. Good morning, everyone.
Thank you. Representative Arata.
Good morning. My name is Amy Arata. I represent House District 65, which includes New Gloucester and part of Poland.
Thank you. Representative Millett.
Good morning, everyone. I'm Soren Millett. I represent House District 71, including the citizens of Norway, Sweden, Waterford, and West Paris.
Thank you. Representative O'Neill.
Morning. My name is Maggie O'Neill, and I represent House District 15, which is in Saco.
Thank you. And Representative Stover.
Good morning. My name is Holly Stover. I represent House District 89, including the towns of Boothbay Harbor, Southport, Edgecombe, Westport Island, and part of South Bristol.
Thank you. And we're joined by folks from the OPEGA staff, including Lucia Nixon, Director of OPEGA, Etta Connors, who serves as committee clerk and administrative assistant for OPEGA, and Amy Gagne, who is an analyst with OPEGA. So given that we're starting a little bit late, I'm going to dispense with my review of the meeting logistics. I think folks know that we are conducting this meeting on YouTube. Please mute yourself when you would not like us to hear your perhaps side conversation. I definitely appreciate your helping us with that. So this morning we'll begin with our summary of the May 14th GOC meeting minutes. Those have been sent out to you. Is there any discussion, comments, or edits? Seeing none, we'll move forward to agenda item number 2. It's our quarterly report back from the Maine Commission on Indigent Legal Services. As committee members know, we've engaged in a review of MCILS for quite some time. We have the interim executive director, Justin Andrus, with us, as well as the Deputy Executive Director of MCILS, Ellie Maciag. They're in the waiting room. I believe they're getting promoted to attendees. At this point, they have sent us a report of their activities since the last time we spoke with them, which was about 3 months ago. So we're very pleased to have you here this morning. Thank you for your time and your efforts. I turn the floor over to you to provide us an update and walk us through the materials you've sent us.
Good morning, Senator Libby. Excuse me, I was coming on as I wasn't prepared for it to suddenly start. So just want to make sure that it was me you were giving the floor to before I get going.
Yes, Mr. Andrus.
All right, thank you. Good morning. So I have presented materials. There's a lot of detail in it. I don't want to bore you with all of it, although I'm certainly prepared to answer any specific questions. I think the most important thing that I can convey today is that we're doing a really good job of the quality control side with the resources that we have. And we've communicated, I think, pretty effectively with our lawyers to bring the controls on how and what they bill for into line with our expectations. And so I'm pleased with that. We're at a little bit of an impasse in terms of moving forward from where we are now. We made great progress in the first few months. We've reached a point where our staffing resources prevent us from making a lot of further change to increase the level of oversight that we're doing. And there's no opposition on our part to doing that. We simply don't yet have the people. There's a lot of stuff in the materials about budget. I haven't received any indication that we should anticipate our budget being increased in any substantial way from where it is now. And so I'm very concerned about that. And I'm concerned that while we work with HR to bring on the 4 limited duration hires that the governor has supported, that I'm not going to be able to pay for them through the biennium. I'm also concerned that there's simply not enough people to fully do the job. I do want to report that I did meet with the state auditor yesterday and with his staff and with my deputy, and I anticipate that he'll be joining you today at some point. And so we had a very productive conversation about what a reasonable audit structure looks like, and I can get into that detail. We haven't implemented it yet because that conversation has just occurred. But what we're looking at after that conversation is continuing our work to establish the risk triggers that we've talked about in previous meetings and to flag cases for specific review. That's going to look like review of specific cases. It may look like review of some random number of cases. The absolute number of cases or lawyers audited will be relatively low, but it should both allow audits of cases that are significant outliers and should also provide an effective deterrent effect. And my understanding is that the IRS, for example, uses a 1% audit rate for significant wage earners and considers that to both be effective and effective as a deterrent. And so I'm sort of working from that perspective, particularly because of the resources. We've had really great compliance. I did put this in the materials, but I want to highlight it. We've had really great compliance with lawyers addressing the risk triggers we have now for the high hour days. We have lawyers writing us checks to reimburse us for slight overpayments. Shouldn't have the overpayments as time goes on, but it's great that the lawyers are participating in that, engaging in that self-audit work for those dates and voluntarily paying back what needs to be paid back. It's not a tremendous number of cases, not a tremendous amount of money, but it's indicative of a sea change in terms of our relationship with counsel. And so I am really happy that there's been buy-in for that. So I don't want to blather. I have a tendency to do that in these hearings, especially sitting by myself in a room. If there are details or questions that folks would like me to get into, or I know the committee had asked to hear about the carry forward, and instead I sent you a memo about what will be a deficit. And so I'm happy to address any of the detail in that, of course.
Thank you, Mr. Andrus. I have a couple of questions, but I want to ask if the committee has questions or comments for Mr. Andrus at this time. Mr. Andrus, could you, I think to remind us and for the benefit of the public, talk a little bit about the new positions you're seeking funding for, the temporary nature of that funding, and where you are with seeking ongoing funding for that?
Sure. So, and I hear that in 2 parts. We're seeking temporary limited duration positions as a stopgap, and we're seeking permanent positions through the legislature. We're approved by the governor to hire 4 limited duration hires. As I understand it, those people would be hired for a maximum of 2 years and would not be part of our baseline budget. The significance there is they don't increase headcount. The governor's perspective, as expressed to me, is that those are to be paid for from the carry forward. So we have about $4.2 million I anticipate are going to carry forward from fiscal year 21 into 22. Some of that money came from 20 into 21. Some of it accrued during 21. And I should say, for accuracy, that that money hasn't landed in any of our accounts yet. So I'm assuming that's going to happen. It's been authorized, but it hasn't happened yet. My concern about the funding is that we were underfunded in our baseline for this biennium. As a result of that, I anticipate that we will be in a deficit for our baseline operational needs by the end of fiscal year 23, approximately April of 23. That is before we spend $500,000 a year on these 4 people. And so I am currently paying attorneys at the rate of about $325,000 a week, plus about $15,000 to $20,000 a week in non-counsel expenses. And so if we are $1 million short, then that's going to drive back by several weeks the date on which we run out of money in fiscal year 23. So that's how the funding is significant. These 4 people would be in 2 tracks. There would be an attorney and a paralegal in each of 2 tracks. One track would be on the training, supervision, and quality side oversight. One track would be on the financial oversight. We also have our accounting technician, who is part of our existing staff. She would have roles that fall slightly outside of the audit function and keeping the operation running, but she's very, very diligent about identifying things, and I want to recognize her here for that. And so she would have a tie-in role with those 2 additional people who are on the financial oversight side. I'd had conversations with other committees about the credentials and experience qualifications for those positions. The reason there's an attorney at the top of each of those is because there is the need for that level of professional experience in assessing either the quality of somebody's services or the reasonability of what they serve. And I should say, one of the complexities of doing audits for us is that it goes beyond, do the numbers line up properly, and into, and are they professionally reasonable in the circumstances? And so that's why we need some attorneys on that side of it. They would be hopefully rolled over to be the first 4 of the permanent staff people through the initiatives that we requested in October that were ultimately amended by the Judiciary Committee. And there is a bill, I believe it's 1687, pending before the legislature that provides us with some additional staff. So the goal is that these 4 people do become permanent. They're the first 4 of more and become part of our baseline funding.
Great, thank you. My second question, and maybe now is a good time to bring in the state auditor, Matt Dunlop. I just would like you to briefly go over some of the material you submitted to us on audit and accountability work, and update the group and the public on what you've been able to work through with the state auditor. So I guess I'd start with you, Justin, then we can have Mr. Andrus, and then we can have the auditor Dunlap chime in.
So in the sense of true audit, we are doing limited work. Audit structures or financial control structures come in a series of phases. There's the identification of the necessary controls, the communication of those controls to the group that's using the money, followed by the identification of which submissions or sets of transactions should be reviewed in greater scrutiny. And then there is that scrutiny, and then there is the what do you do about it. So at the outset, I was talking about having communicated enhanced controls to our attorneys. And so I think there's some trimming and tweaking to continue to be done on that front, but I think we have largely accomplished step 1 of the controls. Here are the expectations. And in the end, they're not complicated. They can get into a lot of trivia, but it really comes down to, you must accurately reflect what you did when you submit it to us. Here's how we need to see that. Things that have been identified by OPEGA, for example, attorneys billing where the attorney name doesn't line up with the person who did the work, making review very difficult. We've communicated that that's unacceptable. Staff people entering time in the name of attorneys, that's unacceptable. From my perspective, that's always been unacceptable. We've certainly continued to communicate that unequivocally. And we are back to doing inefficient voucher review as a product of implementing our 90-day time limit for payment for submission of vouchers to be paid. As a result of that, all or substantially all of the vouchers are are being reviewed. And I say substantially because it's possible something slips through. There are hundreds and hundreds of them, but the goal is, and the practice is, we review that all. In doing that, we're reviewing a lot more information. It does appear that there's much better granularity in the data. And so it does appear that attorneys are doing a reasonably good job about that. Okay, the next step is what triggers the review. And there are a couple of aspects of that. Some of that is with Justice Works, and they haven't completed that work yet. They're generally very responsive to us, but redevelopment programs have a lead time with them. They haven't been able to complete it yet. That's going to include things like checks on data input. And as an example, for any given type of time entry, say a phone call with a client, there's going to be a limit. And if you exceed that limit, it's going to ask you, do you mean that? It's going to allow us to catch typographical errors. That's not going to catch fraud. A person can still make a misrepresentation, but we're going to work to eliminate the typos that might have been resulting in more. Then what we were talking about with the state auditor yesterday is a plan to have a filtering system that looks at a weighted average of cases by case type and then triggers us if a voucher exceeds what we expect to see from case type, or if the case total, some cases have more than one voucher, also exceeds that type. It needs to be a weighted average because some vouchers are very, very, very low because they're associated with another case. So you might spend $1,000 worth of time working on client's case A. In case B, you might bill $6 worth of time for opening and closing the case. And so we need to make sure that we don't make our averages look funny by looking at the $6. So we'll say there's some reasonable lower bound, then we're going to look at the average, and then we're going to say, for example, if we exceed an average, if we exceed limits for time periods, and we talked about that a little bit at our last meeting. Again, that's work that Justice Works is working on. Right now, I don't have the ability to report out by attorney time period easily. I have been given dirty read access of the database. I do have a database tool that lets me build database queries or ask Justice Works for assistance with that and then actually work with the data. But that's not an effective way to report out on a rolling basis. Just for frame of reference, I've never really thought about this in these terms until yesterday. But we are addressing approximately 300,000 hours a year of attorney time. The typical entry, I don't want to use the word average, the typical entry is probably 0.2. Based on that, we're looking at somewhere like 6 million, somewhere like 4 million entries a year, potentially. And so we need to automate as much of that as possible to really have a hope of catching it. So that's the next stage, the filter stage. I also think that we'll need to have a random stage because it will be possible for somebody to figure out some way to game the system and stay underneath our limits. We won't publish what they are, but we don't want somebody to experiment. And so we want to make sure that folks know that there's some possibility that they'll be picked. And just like the IRS, I think most people are law-abiding to begin with. And then those who might not be have a disincentive from doing that. So that'll be the next phase, the determination phase. The investigative phase is a little bit in flux, but we have, when I say we have, Representative Harnett has put forward bills that would give us some powers we need to do that. It would give us a statutory recoupment power. Would give the commission subpoena power to be exercised through the executive director to obtain documents. And it would allow on a case-by-case, lawyer-by-lawyer basis, firm-by-firm, I suppose, the ability to really dive in and look. Now, that's a promise I don't want to make yet because I don't have the people to do it. Even with the 2 people I'm adding, they would have very limited capacity to engage in that level of investigation. But they could do some, and with more people, we could do more. Follow what we do about it. So right now, if we were going to take action, my actions are limited to taking somebody off the rosters. And so once I do that, I lose the jurisdiction. I also don't want to, unless I have to, de-roster somebody who provides good client services for a financial error. Fraud is a different question, but a financial error. And so recoupment gives us the opportunity to work with a lawyer to get repayment without blasting them off the list and hurting our clients. But for right now, that action would have to be in the form of a civil action, either brought by the Attorney General's office, or they would have to give us consent to hire outside counsel to do that. And I should say, in this context, as it comes up sometimes, though I am a lawyer, I am not the commission's lawyer. And so I'm not able to be the person who pursues that kind of action on behalf of the commission.
Great. Thank you, Director Andrus. Auditor Dunlap, nice to see you. Thanks for stepping up to provide some assistance to this project at our request. Before I call on you, Auditor Dunlap, I see that Senator Bailey has a question.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So just as the executive director was talking, a question occurred to me. So Executive Director Andrus, I'm just wondering if in terms of auditing, your plans include, and I assume currently you don't have the ability because you don't have the staff, but if your plans include, I recall I do a lot of real estate law, and I recall when I was a title insurance agent that part of the audit process that the title insurance companies I used to underwrite for included an in-person visit. And again, these were done randomly, that they would just call and say, we're going to be in town next Friday. We want to come look at your books, essentially. And they would go through them to ensure that I was doing things properly as their agent. So do your plans for auditing include anything like that? Thank you.
Not randomly, but potentially based on information supporting that need. We certainly could include that. And ultimately, it's up to the legislature in the sense that if we're staffed to be able to do that, we could do that more effectively or more often. When I was talking with the state auditor yesterday, for the first time, I did some math about costs. So if we have a non-attorney staff person, but a skilled staff person in an audit role, a person that costs the state something like $110,000, $120,000 with ancillary costs and everything else. That is equivalent to one of my attorneys full-time for a year. And so that in turn, on average, means 84, 85 cases. So every person that we assign to the audit function on a full-time basis is equivalent to 84 or 85 cases that MCIS could have served with the same money. And so ultimately, the legislature will give me the instruction about where to put those resources. But I think we need to think about where the value in the audit proposition is and compared to the value of the same money being allocated to serve the underlying function of the commission.
Further questions or comments from the committee for Director Andrus? Seeing none, Auditor Dunlap, the floor is yours.
Well, thank you very much, Senator. And I really have to give a very high commendation to Mr. Andrews for putting, and his team for putting so much thought into this under some very strained circumstances. You know, this is a tough place to work from, and I think they've done an extraordinary job in putting together a plan. And we've talked about this. We had a lengthy conversation just yesterday, actually, looking at sort of how we view the world of audit. And I think sometimes it's not always well understood exactly what it is we do. You know, the Office of the State Auditor is 33 people. And a lot of what we do is, we examine controls put in place by agencies as they expend funds under certain programs to see if those controls actually work. And it's really not 100% guarantee, because you take like the Medicaid program, for example, you're talking about, billions of dollars that pass through that. You can't really examine every single transaction. It would probably take our staff about 150 years to do that. It's not practical to Justin's point, which is one of the things that you have to examine is cost effectiveness when you're doing controls. And the real purpose here is to give assurance that the resources that are allocated for this purpose are being used for that purpose as effectively as possible. And one of the analogies that we come across is like, say you have, a restaurant that does all cash. You start from not having any locks on the doors, and then you move forward from that. And how you do your bank deposit. Does it really make sense? Is it cost effective to have an armored car do your bank deposit for you? Or, do you have two people reconcile the accounts and then somebody else does the deposit and then another person pays the bills? I mean, those are simple, cost effective controls. And what we talked about really was going through the basic frameworks of controls. And there are international standards for this, and every country does it a little bit differently. But in the United States, we use the COSO framework. That's the Council on Sponsoring Organizations of the Treadway Commission, which came about in the 70s, and then it was amplified greatly after some of the accounting scandals at Enron and WorldCom, for example. So this is pretty highly refined standards. But you do your important work in terms of risk assessment, and then basically measuring and prioritizing those risks. Do you really want to be examining every transaction that encompasses 0.2 of an hour? That's not cost effective and it won't tell you very much. So we just sort of described that process that Mr. Andrews has already sort of laid out for you, having different tiers of examination. And this is done internally by the executive director's office at the commission. And so they would review the transactions and look for things that are red flags that may prompt further inquiry. And one of the cases we talked about was a misdemeanor case that could lead to someone being deported and sent to a very dangerous situation where an attorney would spend much, much more time than he or she would on a normal misdemeanor case. So when you're working, and I'm not a lawyer, I think it says an awful lot for the legal profession that no self-respecting law school would send me a course catalog. But that having been said, when you look at the broad scope of what you deal with in criminal law, which are the misdemeanors, elevated misdemeanors, and felonies, that gives you a pretty broad framework to look at some of these samplings and see if they make sense. Having that rolling weighted average makes a lot of sense. When we do audits, we don't really do things randomly. We do have a process for assessing how we build samples that we test. We test the controls, and that will give you a pretty good indication of how effective your controls are. And one of the things I always thinking sort of comparatively, because that works for me very well, thinking about back when I was in the legislature and we talked about this example, dealing with some of the crisis on our lakes and ponds around personal watercraft. It was a real social issue back in the 1990s. And what we built as a committee, or actually a pair of committees with natural resources and inland fisheries and wildlife, were a series of processes that towns could engage in based on what they had available for resources and what they needed to be effective. If you have a very, very busy waterway that's shared by a number of towns, we had propositions that those towns would pool their resources and hire an inland harbor master to maintain control, which made a lot of sense in those communities. But then you have a remote pond that has one access point. Those towns would say, well, putting a sign at the boat landing saying that personal watercraft aren't allowed might be enough, or having it part of a routine patrol of the sheriff's department. So we kind of embraced that as a 3-tiered process. And then we reviewed it after a year, and it turned out it worked very, very well. So I think in an analogous format, what Director Andrews has described to you would probably work pretty well. It needs some refinement, and then you need to then monitor it to see how well it works. But I think it's a much better place than where we've started from, in my own personal view. And the real point here, again, is to give the legislature and the people of Maine the assurance that the scarce resources that are allocated for this purpose are going predominantly to that purpose. You know, you think about, you know, the committee rooms you sit in, 100% control is impossible. So the committee analysts will lay out pads of paper and pens, you know, that's paid for by the legislature. You take notes, and then on your way out, you take your notepad with you. You know, the notepad is now probably at your house. Are you stealing? Not necessarily, but it is a use of resources. But what you want to have the people understand is that the resources that are deployed are being used for the purpose in which they were intended. Whether that's a notepad used by a legislator or a billable hour prompted by an attorney in a case for somebody who has no resources, which is really the intent here. And I think that this goes a long way towards getting to that point.
Thank you, Auditor Dunlap. Appreciate that. Are there questions or comments from the committee for either Auditor Dunlap or Director Andrews? Representative Millet.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Auditor Dunlap and Interim Director Andrews. I think Matt has touched upon the themes that we as a GOC commented on earlier when we'd met with the commission in our previous legislative lives, as well as since Director Andrews has been on board. Effective and appropriate use of resources, internal controls, and the issue of look back to problems in the previous administration where there were concerns expressed in terms of billing and perhaps overbilling and so on. So I'm just kind of curious as to whether the auditor and the interim director had dealt with the issue that we struggled with at a previous meeting. Can we afford to do a look back on the effective use of resources in the or under the previous director? Or are there models going forward that are more appropriate for interim Director Andrews and the auditor and Director Andrews's successor to utilize the services of the audit department, limited as they may be, in terms of maybe a zeroing in on the internal control focus? I think Matt has touched on some items that I would think are important in terms of the handling of money, the use of the commission as a regular reporting from the director to the commission, so that any issues of expenditure lacking oversight or perhaps anything approaching impropriety could be zeroed in on by or with the help of the auditor on a real-time basis. I guess I'm focusing my comments, Mr. Chair, on are we basically working on a go-forward basis and acknowledging that the staffing support from audit is not really going to be there to do a look back? And are the two people involved really going to be able to assist the director that's chosen and the commission that's serving on a regular basis going forward to really just point out problem areas and solve them before they become real?
Well, I guess I can start, Mr. Chairman, if that's appropriate. You know, we had talked at great length, Representative Millet, about that. I know that OPEGA has also done analysis of what resources it would take to do a full look back. It's probably not very cost effective to do that. You know, even if you had the people available, and I know that OPEGA thought it would take about 2 analysts about 10 to 12 months working full time to get a pretty good view of that. The issue then is, do you recoup anything? Is it possible to recoup anything, even if you are able to track it down? If you're talking about open fraud, one of the aspects of fraud is that fraudsters don't keep very good records for obvious reasons. So it's tough to track that kind of thing down. So going forward is probably more cost effective and would probably yield a little bit more bang for the buck. We're in the same position really as OPEGA. We have limited staff. This is a group of people who are brilliant and they work fiendishly all year to get the single audit done, which represents, a pretty significant outlay of resources. One of the philosophical questions, and I think Mr. Andrews touched on this, and in my work here, this is all still relatively new to me. I have a tutor who helps me understand this, and he sort of asked this philosophical question that all this work that we do to develop, the comprehensive annual financial report done by the Controller's Office, and then the single audit that we do, does anybody really look at it? And I think a lot of people do look at it. I know that, Representative Millett is probably more familiar than practically anybody in state government with these documents and his work in finance and on the Appropriations Committee over the years. But it's kind of one of those aspects of human nature. And in my conversation with Mr. Andrews yesterday, he indicated that just the work that they've already done is giving them much more detailed information, because people tend to behave a little bit differently if they think somebody's paying attention. Right. And I think that's one of the interesting aspects of control. If you can put a camera in the corner of, I used to work as a bar manager, so we had a camera up over the bar. I'm not really sure it was actually hooked up to anything. But the bartenders were much more mindful of how they reconciled their cash drawers at the end of the night, now weren't they? So I think that's one of the things that I think the people that we work with in state government are hardworking, they're diligent, they try to do a good job. I think another thing that Mr. Andrews touched on in my own observation of how the law works, about 95% of the revised statutes of Maine are crafted for about 5% of the public. Most people do their utmost to comply with the law. Some people may not care very much, don't think it matters. And then you have people who simply game the system, and they're the ones that sometimes get tangled up in the judicial system. But I think getting back to the core of Representative Millett's question about doing a full look back, this is something I see it now because I look for it. I see it in the paper every day. There's an embezzlement somewhere of, an organization. And, depending on the individual circumstances, you can recoup money back. Probably the most famous one in Maine history was the defalcation of the state treasurer in 1859, who made off with 1/4 of the state budget in order to shore up failing investments. Fortunately, the individual had to be bonded. It took about 5 years to get the money back, but eventually they got the money back. But that was before we had an auditor. That was before we had really any sense of the need for controls. Everything was based on honor, and that leaves windows of opportunity. But going forward now, with this particular case, we would have to devote significant resources to try to do a look back. And I think what you would know at the very end, Representative Millett, is what you know now and not much more. So it's obviously always the decision of the legislature how to allocate resources. Our view is the resources are better deployed going forward than they are looking backward.
Representative Millett.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Matt. I particularly appreciated your experiences at Pat's Pizza, because I'm sure that was the start of your auditing bent. But I think you've made some very good points that I've always found, and Senator Bailey mentioned it earlier, the spot audit and people such as Director Andrus and his predecessor working for a commission that may or may not be actively interested in effective internal controls, with an operation where people might be just trying to keep the ship afloat. I've always found, whether I was working for a board or a governor, that you can't over communicate budget to actual information on a regular meeting basis, and let those board members, or in this case too, the governor, the chief executive, know how things are going. The Oversight Committee, the Judiciary Committee, those kinds of updates with a real interest in support for the internal controls, staffing, and focus, I think are so critical. And I agree with Matt, and I think the director is kind of focused too on a going forward basis. So the more we can do to encourage that relationship, at least in the conversational sense and in the reporting to the Oversight Commission, who I think are going to be more interested in this internal control and effective use of the resources going forward. So thank you both.
Thank you, Representative Millet. Are there other comments or questions from the committee? Representative Millet.
Thank you. And I don't want the director to leave without some feedback from us on budget. I know the 4 categories that we talked about in the report are all worthy of extended discussion: budget, auditing, quality control, and determination of indigency. But I was thinking as we were listening to him, the presentation that was made to the Judiciary Committee, and I think Senator Bailey and other members of our group, Senator Keim, and members of the Appropriations Committee, Representative Cardone, have a previous experience in the Judiciary Committee and are aware that that committee gave 7 very comprehensive recommendations for future funding of MCILS, only 2 of which are currently before the Appropriations Committee that Representative Rada and Senator Bailey and I are serving on. And I'm not able to speak for them or our leaders. I know on my side of the aisle, both Senator Timberlake and Representative Dillingham, and I know you, Senator Libby, have the experience of this group, as do several other former members. And the 7 returnees that are currently on our GOC committee all remember the conversations that started almost 2 years ago. So I would think it would be reasonably certain to assume that the committee would agree to the rate increases or the range increases for the newly selected director and the carry forward. And I know that some of us would like to do more. They're not currently in the change package, but there were recommendations for 14 additional staff ongoing, and Senator Bailey can comment more in detail on them, along with the public defender concept. It's just going to come down in the next week and a half to how much can we find that would support a more efficient and complete staffing and program oversight going forward within the resources we have and the time that we're limited by. We may not resolve this entirely by adjournment day, but I do want to make sure the director knows that some of us would like to go beyond those 2 minimal issues, which do carry with it. I'm confident, and I've had this conversation with the chief executive, flexibility in the hiring of limited period people with that carry forward. So if others feel more inclined to want to be open and transparent with the director, I hope they would weigh in. But I just speak for myself in saying I'd like to do more than the 2 items that are currently in the change package. We'll see if we can do so in the next week and a half. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Representative Millet. Senator Bailey.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So I just wanted to agree with Representative Millet, and I think that from my perspective, as he indicated, I would certainly want to do more and make sure that the commission does have the staffing and resources to continue what they have started in doing good work going forward, as we indicated, not necessarily looking back, but ensuring going forward. So I do look forward to working with my other AFA member going forward and looking at this, and also communicating with Director Andrews as we tackle this problem, and hopefully we can continue to make progress. That's the important thing, is that we make progress. So thank you.
Thank you, Senator Bailey. Other comments or questions from the committee? Seeing none, Auditor Dunlap, is it fair to say your office has provided the services and support to MCILS that we had discussed, and that perhaps there's, for the next quarter at least, not as much activity on your end? Is that a fair statement?
I think that's a fair statement. I think we'll continue to have conversations with Mr. Andrews and his staff as they refine their ideas, and we're happy to provide feedback based on our experience. But I think they're doing great work.
Appreciate that. Appreciate your efforts here. Obviously, the efforts of your staff to jump into this project at our request. We definitely appreciate it. I think the presentation that you and Director Andrews gave today helps give me a bit more confidence that we're headed in the right direction. So I want to thank you for that, Matt. And for Director Andrews and Deputy Director Maciag, obviously we've got a couple of weeks ahead of us here where we'll have some hopefully fruitful conversations around the funding component, as well as some other issues before the legislature. And then obviously at our next quarterly check-in, we will hopefully have some answers to these outstanding questions and be able to hear about how you're continuing on your path to getting MCILS in a better position. So unless there are no other questions from the committee, I think we will thank these folks for their time this morning and their engagement, and we'll move on to the next section of our agenda. Thank you all.
Thank you. Thank you for your work. We appreciate it.
Very good. All right, we will move to agenda item number 3, which is under unfinished business. Continued discussion of OPEGA's tax expenditure review process. Representative Millett and I think, are the couple of folks on this committee most interested in how the review process has unfolded over time. And so we've continued to have discussions about how to make some refinements and adjustments, although both of us are experiencing that end of session time crunch that everyone on the committee can appreciate. So I think what we were hoping to propose, and Lucia can share her screen, we can walk through this document together, but the short version is we'd like to propose a joint study order that would be considered by the House and Senate to create a process for interested parties to get together over the summer and fall, really dig into some of the details around this tax expenditure review process, and be able to make a report back to the tax committee and this committee at the beginning of the next session. And so Lucia has presented a draft of this study order. It's fairly straightforward. Representative Millett has reviewed the language as well, and I think I won't speak for him, although I think he's comfortable with how we drafted it. So at this point, I just wanted to have Lucia walk through very briefly this document and see if there's any feedback from this committee before we move it forward. So Lucia, I turn it over to you.
Thank you. You can see it fine, the screen sharing?
Yes.
Okay, great. So yes, I prepared this proposed outline at the request of Senator Libby. It would be the framework for a joint study order, and which is the mechanism that is necessary for legislative members to meet outside of their regular, in a format that's different than their regular committees. So the idea of having 4 members from the GOC and 4 members from the Taxation Committee to meet together over the interim to focus on these questions that have come up, but as Senator Libby said, have sort of run out of time at the flurry of the end of session. So as he outlined, it would be 8 members for this working group, 4 members of the Senate, with 2 members from each of the parties holding a large number of seats, and similarly 4 members from the House. And amongst that split out would also be 4 members from GOC and 4 members from tax. It would follow sort of standard format for these groups to be formed over interim, so that there would be a chair, Senate chair and a House chair, and the appointments would be made by the Speaker and the President. And then focusing on Senator Libby's proposal for what the group would do. This is sort of picking up on the earlier discussions that I think he brought forward, and he and Representative Millett have been discussing, but just taking that look in a little bit of a more focused way than they were able to do during session, of looking at the statutes that are in place now, both in Title III and Title 36. What have been the experiences of the key entities involved in tax expenditure reviews? So that would be the GOC, OPEGA, the Taxation Committee, and the Maine Revenue Services. Looking also at how this is approached in other states and any lessons we could learn from there. If we're considering, people have ideas for things they want to do, we could look to other states or help that process. And then, and by we, I'm saying, so lower down, you'll see that the staff assistants would come from through the Legislative Council, but presumably from OPEGA and the OFPR, which staffs the Taxation Committee. So we would be supporting you in that work if this goes forward. And also Senator Libby proposes to gather input from stakeholders. So give people the opportunity to present their ideas as well, looking to those who are heavily involved in the process. And then this group, after several meetings, would make some recommendations and any necessary or appropriate changes to statute, and would then provide a report by the first Wednesday in December, which is again just very standard required reporting dates for interim work. That's
Thank
the
you,
end of
Lucia.
the outline.
Are there any questions or comments from the committee on this proposal? Any volunteers to serve on this august group of lawmakers?
Senator Libby, I will duck your direct question, but I want to just comment that I appreciate the work you did and Director Nixon did in putting this together. I confess now that I got in the cart before the horse and a busy time of the year when I raised this issue, but I think the design of the work group and the membership and the focus on process and laws and trying to make better use of the work that OPEGA does on our behalf, and working with GOC and the tax committee, and looking at it from a perspective of both stakeholders and other states and time commitments, and really zeroing in on the priorities, does gather and address everything that I wanted to do from the beginning. So I'm very comfortable with the design and the work group. Thank you for your work.
Very good, Representative Millett. Thank you for those comments. Any other comments or questions from the committee? Seeing none, I'll just note in terms of process here, there's no action for us to take. I'm assuming no comments means that this group is fine to let this proceed, and so we'll present it on the Senate floor as a joint order, and it will hopefully pass the Senate and come to the House for adoption, and then over to Legislative Council for funding. So that's the kind of outline of next steps.
It's kind of ironic we're reviewing the reviews. I don't know how else you would word it, but we might get some pushback on that. How very government of us to review the reviews. I don't know.
I appreciate that, Representative Barata. I think this is born out of that discussion earlier this year of improving the turnaround time for tax expenditure reviews, and for me, that's the real impetus for this review of
that.
review.
Yeah, just the title is, yeah. Thank you.
Along similar lines, we voted on a bill yesterday to prohibit municipalities from prohibiting activities. And so along the same lines. Okay. Seeing no other comments on this item, we will keep ourselves moving. So agenda item number 4, is regarding a request of us to consider an OPEGA review of the RFP process that's contained within DAFs. This particular request involves the Department of Public Safety and a bidding process where I believe it was emailed to us by Etta last night. Is that right, Lucia? A document associated with this agenda item?
Yes, so you heard the review request presented at your last meeting, and then there was what the document that went by email, and I can share on screen. There was a lengthy discussion and a wide range of potential information requests that you would like to be made before you have further discussion regarding next steps on this. And so given the length of the list, the chairs suggested that we pull this together in an organized format and bring it back to you to really think about what is it at this point in time, and so that we can make those requests efficiently and effectively. Would you like me to share the screen to show the list, or does everybody have it?
I think sharing the screen would be fine.
Okay.
I think and again, I was absent for this discussion, so I'll be relying on other members here, but Lucia and the staff have put together that list of information requests. When we reviewed that list, it was pretty substantial. I didn't have a good sense yet of whether the committee really wanted to proceed with taking further action here. And the amount of documents that were suggested for us to review were pretty substantial. So I just wanted to see if the committee wanted to proceed with going down a path of further information requests or other activities that we might try to refine this list, pare it down so that it's manageable. I think that's the goal we're seeking today. So Lucia, you want to just walk through this for us very briefly?
Sure, yeah. So we organized the list, going through all the meeting minutes from last time. We organized this list into 3 parts. So the first part is information that would be specific, related to the specific RFP that led to this request. And so A1 through A6 are items that were suggested as possible information requests: the copy of the RFP, creating a timeline of activity for this RFP and the subsequent appeal process. So that would also be getting the information and compiling a timeline, collecting information on past contracts and the history with the incumbent vendor for sports marketing services. And so maybe if you do want to go down that path, maybe thinking about the amount of history. And then 4th was information about the appeal that was pursued by the requester, and minutes and summaries of all awards, appeal panel meetings, and decisions. And then information about steps taken by the Department of Public Safety and the Bureau of Highway Safety to procure services after the contract was invalidated through the appeal. And then there was a specific question from Senator Keim about what was meant by irregularity and how when the sponsor's description of the RFP or in the process, there was reference to irregularity, maybe in the description and the appeal. And so more information on that. So there were those 6 items that we identified as specific to this particular procurement. And then there were 5 items with some sub items related to information regarding the state procurement process in general. So first was rules, policies, and procedures governing state procurement, which overall could, be a significant amount of information. So if there's specific things that you wanted there, we could, it might be helpful to narrow that down. 2 would be creating a summary and explanation of the process for procurements, appeals, and what happens after an appeal. 3rd was getting information on past practices in state procurements in terms of timeframes. So some of the questions had come up about the amount of time that had passed in this particular instance led to a question about more general information about timeframes. And then 4th, historical data on state procurements for prior 2 to 3 years. Again, this was generally stated as state procurements. I don't know, that could be quite a bit of information, but the number of RFPs issued, the number of appeals, the date of release and date of contract award for all of the RFPs. And then 5, we could obviously easily get you this. There was a 2008 OPEGA report on state contracting for professional services and the procurement process. And that was specifically, contracting for services as opposed to contracting for goods. The third category was potential individuals to invite to answer questions regarding the requests. The first group was Representative Bell, the sponsor, who you did hear from, but then also potentially his constituent, Steve Woods, who brought the matter to Representative Bell's attention. Second group was representatives of the Department of Public Safety, including the Commissioner and the Director of Bureau of Highway Safety. And third, representatives of DAFs, which is a longer list, the Commissioner, Chief Procurement Officer, the Chair of the Contract Review Committee, and the Chair of the Awards Appeal Panel. So this is the list of everything that was suggested, and however, Senator Liberty, however you want to proceed from here in figuring out next steps, and whether you want me to keep it up on the screen, just let me know.
I think you could probably take it down, Lucia. Folks will have this in their inbox from Etta from yesterday afternoon, if you'd like to refer back to it. I guess I'm looking to the committee to give some guidance here on how staff should proceed. I think asking them to gather information for everything on this list is going to be quite a lift. So if we can narrow the scope here for our staff's benefit, I think that would be helpful. Senator Bailey, followed by Representative Arata.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I don't necessarily have something concrete in terms of shortening the list, but from my perspective, I mean, what I would like to get at as far as information is just first kind of an initial determination in terms of, was this just a unique circumstance involving this vendor and this department, or is there something systemic either with the RFP process, this particular agency, and or the process in general? So as we try to narrow this request, I mean, that's what I would like to get at. I'm not quite sure how we get at that, but that is what my focus would be.
Thank you, Senator. Representative Arata.
Thank you. I agree with Senator Bailey, and perhaps a good way to accomplish this is to have an update of the 2008 OPEGA report. I'm sure that some things have changed since 2008, but maybe they haven't. So that might be able to provide us all the information we need from section B of the document we just saw.
Okay. Lucia, would pulling the rules, policies, and statute governing procurement, plus providing us with that 2008 report, that would be a fairly reasonable lift, I'd expect, right?
Yeah, sure. Mm-hmm. And I guess I'd have to see, not having been here in 2008, I'd have to familiarize myself with how specifically relevant that report will end up being to this question. But it sounds, and I just haven't had the opportunity to do that yet. But we could certainly look through it and see how germane it is and what things we could update. So yes, B1 and B5, I think, would definitely be doable.
Okay. And then along those lines, I saw that Senator Keim under section A, A6, perhaps Lucia, you could help us communicate with the sponsor to get that clarification.
Sure. Yep.
I think that would be a pretty easy lift.
the RFP also would be easy to, if people want that. I don't know if you want that level of detail, but I think it's readily available if you wanted it.
Can't hurt. And then the final thought is perhaps the staff could work on a few clarifying questions that we could transmit to the appropriate folks at the Department of Public Safety and the Department of Administrative and Financial Services, maybe 3 or 4 questions that we could put before them and ask them to answer for us in writing. You know, the next meeting for us is going to be later this month. I'm not sure if that turnaround time is realistic or not. Well, it's 3 weeks from now, right? We could try. We could try for
Yeah, if
that.
the questions are clear and we can get them out soon, we could try.
So that's another idea to just throw out there. Representative Stover and then Senator Bailey,
Thank
followed
you.
by Representative Millette.
Thank you. I just, I agree with Senator Bailey. I think if we can look at the systemic issues around the RFP process, and I think the statute could get at that. And I know for the questions I asked, they probably would be addressed in that statute. So that would take care of those. Thank you.
Thank you, Representative Stover. Senator Bailey.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Lucia, I would think that it wouldn't be too difficult to at least get the appeal decision in this particular matter, and that perhaps will let us know how much more detail we need. My hope would be there would be a lot of detail in that appeal decision, but that might be the place to start in terms of just tying together this unique situation with the more systemic look. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Bailey. Representative Millett.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and I concur with the comments that have just been made. I do think we need to be very careful about this because we should not be setting ourselves up as a body that hears concerns with the RFP process that might be seen as short-stopping or interfering with the appeal process. I think that was B2, Lucia, and as you frame the questions that Chair Libby has asked you to do, I think you can better do this than we can collectively. Highlight anything that might concern you about the way in which the RFP process was handled and the scoring and ratings, but not get into the level of who's right and who's wrong in an appeal-like forum, because I think that's a little awkward for us to be in and could be a bad precedent to set. But I like the idea of getting the questions before us and the answers, and we take a look at, did anything go wrong that is in violation of the standard practices and the rules and the rules of conduct. I just don't want us to be an adjudicatory board or review panel going forward. I think that could be troublesome.
Thank you, Representative Millett. I think I agree completely that perhaps a way to frame this up from a big picture perspective is we have been presented with an example of, an alleged discrepancy in the appeal process. So the example might be illustrative for us, but it's not our role to investigate that. Really, it's using that example in the context of trying to examine whether there are systemic issues with the RFP and appeal process. That I think is our goal with this project. Okay.
Can I ask a question, Senator Libby?
Yes, please, Lucia.
So I'm very clear. I think I'm very clear on the information that we are going to request that you've asked OPEGA to gather either directly or through the administrating agencies. I'm a little less clear, and I'm clear on, I think, inviting well, I guess I'd like some clarity on whether you'd then also want to invite them to answer questions at the next meeting. What I'm a little less clear on is whether you wanted to send questions to DAFs and the Department of Public Safety in advance, and what I need a little more direction on what those questions would be if you want to send them in advance. If you just want to invite us to get the information and invite them to come to answer your questions, that's fine. If you want us to send questions in advance, I need a little more direction.
Yeah, I think I'm open to having participation at the next meeting by representatives from DAFs and Department of Public Safety. To respond to your concern, Lucia, I think we could work on putting the information requests together, transmit that to the two departments, and then the committee, I think, will have questions for them when they attend. So I know I'm sort of saying something different than I did just a moment ago, but perhaps we can invite them to answer our questions at the next meeting, if that sounds good to folks.
And would
Any
you also
objection?
like Representative Bell and his constituent available at that meeting?
They're welcome to attend and observe, and they may be available for questions if the committee has questions for them.
Okay.
Yeah. But no expectation that they make a presentation at this one.
Okay.
Does that sound okay to folks? Any other thoughts, comments, requests? Okay. Lucia, do we need a vote on a motion, or are you comfortable with proceeding as we've discussed?
I'm comfortable with proceeding. I think at the last meeting you voted to request information, and this is a refinement of that information request. So I'm happy to go either way, whichever suits your purposes. You have voted to request information, and this is refining, clarifying what that is. So
great. I think that's all we need for now. All right. Moving on to agenda item number 5, update from Lucia on status of projects in process.
sure. So happy to report that at your next meeting, we will be presenting to you the OPEGA report on the Maine Citizen Initiative and People's Veto process. So we are that's all in the works to the various deadlines and transmittals to different people and getting the agency's formal comment letter, and looking forward to making that presentation to you after. It'll be good to get that wrapped up. I know it had to get put on the back burner a number of times, so I know staff are very happy to be finally moving towards presenting the results of this. It's pretty historical overview of citizens initiatives and people's vetoes, and then some specific areas where the GOC asked OPEGA to look for opportunities for improvement. Similarly, not quite so far, but getting close, is the OPEGA report on the seed capital investment tax credit evaluation. So we are working on drafting that report and getting everything lined up to get that presented to you later in the summer. On the Maine Commission on Indigent Legal Services, as you may remember, you have this additional piece of work that we are doing related to indigency determination. And so we're actively analyzing some survey and interview data that we have collected there, and looking at also getting some additional administrative data that will help us answer questions for that. So that's in full field work. As soon as people get a little bit more freed up from the items I've been discussing with you, we will get started on the frontline, the survey of frontline workers. The two other things that have you recently voted and approved, the parameters for the historical preservation tax credit and the research and development tax credit. And so staff are getting actively underway on working both of those, particularly historic rehab credit, which is our first priority. So things are going right along with all of those. You just got your report back from MCILS we'll schedule another one in 3 months. And we just also touched base on the sort of active request for a potential additional review. So that is my update. I think that's it. If anybody has any questions.
Thank you, Lucia. Any questions? Representative Millet.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Another acknowledgement of the hectic times that we're in. Lucia sent us an email on May 17th with references to all of the LDs that were in play at that time that could affect OPEGAs going forward and the work of GOC. And I found it interesting. Some of them, 3 of them at least, refer to the MCILS discussion we had earlier. And then I had some questions during the last 2 session days. Are there any amendments pending that would influence or tie to our work previously on the Pine Tree development zones? Rumor mills were flying yesterday that amendments were in the works. And I just wondered if any of the staff members from OPEGA or the GOC members are alert to anything that would be pending in the next few session days that directly impacts our positions on Pine Tree and MCILS and so on.
Lucia, please go ahead.
I don't have an update immediately for Pine Tree, but I'm happy to see if there's anything I can get to you on that. On the MCILS pieces, there are 3 bills. In addition to what Director Andrus was talking about that's in the change package, there are 3 bills that were reported out of, well, I don't think they've actually been reported out, but they've been voted in judiciary. So anyone who's still on here who's from judiciary can maybe correct me if I'm wrong, but there were majority ought to pass reports on 3 committee bills related to MCILS. So they are divided reports. The majority is ought to pass. And so those I think are not yet, haven't come to the floor yet. And I think my understanding perhaps from Justin was that some of the things that judiciary had proposed, they then folded into these committee bills. So those are LD 1685, 1686, and 1687. And so if you want to keep your eye on those, if you want, those are the numbers to keep your eye out. One of them is about a pilot for a public defender's office. That's 1685, and then 1686, sorry. And then 1685 would transfer the financial screening function for eligibility from the commission to the judicial branch. And I'm sure there's more details to that, but at a high level. And then 1687 is sort of the comprehensive bill that I believe Justin did reference in his presentation earlier, that makes a number of different changes to the commission and does provide, has appropriations for ongoing funding. So I guess that would get to you eventually at the appropriations table if it got through on the floor. So those are the 3 ones I'm aware of, but to the best of my knowledge, they have been voted, but not yet reported out of judiciary.
Thank you,
Thank you,
Lucia.
Lucia.
That's very helpful. Would you say that all 3 of the bills on MCILS would have fiscal notes on them?
The third one, 1687, definitely does. I can just, let me quickly look. I think 2 out of the 3 did and 1 didn't. So but I don't want to be guessing while I'm telling you that. So let me just double check. 1687, the big comprehensive one, most definitely does have an appropriation and allocations section. The one on hold on one second. The public defender's office pilot project, that also does have an appropriation section on it. And I would guess also let me just double check on the one that moves the financial screeners does not, which is interesting, but yeah.
Thank you. That's helpful. And I'm not trying to ask you to do what I should be doing, but those bills will likely come on a calendar on the fly. And if
Yes.
it were possible for you to share those fiscal notes for 1686 and 7,
Yeah.
that would be great. Thank you.
Sure. Does anyone else want to receive those, or should I just send them to Representative Millet, Bailey, Stover? Okay.
You can send them to the group, Lucia. If that's
Okay,
easier.
I'll just send them to everyone. That's perfect. Okay, so I will send copies of those 3 bills. I will look up, we'll track down anything on Pine Tree Development Zone. And if it would be helpful also, I think I could provide another little sort of high level summary of what's out there and coming to the floor related to GOC and OPEGA.
I think that would be welcome, Lucia.
Good time. It's a busy time to keep track of everything, I know.
Right.
And it'll change by the time I send it to you, just as a caveat.
Any other questions or comments for Lucia? Okay, seeing none, we'll move to our last agenda item, planning for upcoming meetings. So everyone knows we're rapidly approaching the end of session. We've got our next meeting scheduled for June 25th. My expectation is that the current so-called super order that governs electronic remote meetings will still be in effect by June 25th. That if the legislature, adjourns on June 16th, for example, which I think is the goal, that they would not adjourn sine die until after veto day, which would occur a couple weeks after the 16th. So that is all to say the June 25th meeting will likely continue in the same remote format. Historically, GOC has taken July off. So I'd propose we continue with that tradition and then plan to meet monthly in August, September, October, November, in keeping with past tradition. So I think that's the rough framework for our summer and fall work. I've been talking with a few committee members, and I think Fridays may be challenging for folks to do when we're out of session. So I wanted to suggest that we think about perhaps the first or second Wednesday of each of those months as our regular monthly GOC meeting in the off session. Wanted to hear if there was any concern or comment on that suggestion for first or second Wednesday. And again, that time frame of August through November, December. Hearing no strong objection, I think we'll just take a look at the calendar and pick one and go from there. Lucia, anything else I need to cover on that one?
No, I just think the sooner that we know what you pick, the better for us to start planning ahead for those. So
let's just say the second Wednesday of the month.
great.
Okay. Lucia noted our upcoming meeting. We will receive the report back on the Maine Citizen Initiative and People's Veto Process report. This was a GOC request from the last legislature, so we'll look forward to getting that report. Any other comments or questions from the committee before we adjourn? Appreciate everyone hopping on Zoom this morning, especially after a busy week back at the State House. Representative Millet, do you have a motion to adjourn?
So move. Thank you for your last comments. That's very helpful.
Sure thing. And is there a second? Representative O'Neill is seconded. All those in favor, show of hands. Thank you all very much. Have a great weekend.
Thank you.